Cool. All right. Thank you everyone for joining this month's Funk lecture, given by Dolors Armenteras Pascual. Before we start with the seminar, I have a few announcements from the IBS I want to make. So we have 4 upcoming workshops available. 3 of them are on species distribution modeling, and 1 of them is on Darwin Core. If you want to learn more about these workshops or have any questions or want to register, please visit our website at biogeography.org. And then our upcoming biannual conference will be hosted in Aarhus in 2026. So keep an eye out for any upcoming emails or social media posts about the conference. And then lastly, for our seminar, we will have a Q&A session. So any comments or questions you have, please put them in the chat box. Or if you want to directly ask a question, please raise your hand and we will unmute you. And yeah, thank you again so much for attending. This talk is being recorded and we will post it to YouTube afterwards. And if you have any questions or want to learn more about the society, please visit our website at biogeography.org, and I will hand it over to Marta to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Raymond. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for this next Funk lecture. We're really excited to have our speaker today. My name is Marta Jarzyna, and I'm the Director of Communications at the International Biogeography Society. And it is my immense pleasure to introduce today's Funk lecture speaker, Dr. Dolors Armenteras. Dr. Armenteras is a full professor of landscape ecology at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia in Bogota. Initially, she was trained as a biologist at the University of Barcelona, and then she obtained a master's in environmental forestry from the University of Wales, and then a PhD in physical geography from King's College London. So her research and academic preparation is pretty broad and really interesting. And her research applies landscape ecology to conservation biology. She asks questions about deforestation, forest degradation, but also spatial ecology, climate change impacts on biodiversity, and so on. She's fascinated by how landscape change through both human influences, but also natural processes. And she likes to focus especially on fire ecology, climate adaptation, and evidence-based conservation methods. She has published over 200 publications, and she serves on several editorial boards and is a respected voice in environmental policy. She often engages with governments and organizations to forge effective conservation strategies. Within that policy sphere, she has contributed to significant environmental assessments and reports, including several UNEP's Global Environmental Outlooks and the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which a lot of us are familiar with, and we cite it a lot in our work as well. Her work not only spans extensive research, but she is an active policy person. She engages in policy in her role as a Fulbright Nexus Scholar, and she has worked with IPBES and the most recent UN-CCD Science Policy Interface. So in addition to this amazing research and policy engagement portfolio, she has also been a dedicated mentor, and she has mentored over 50 graduate students throughout her career. She really has fostered the next generation of environmental scientists and scholars. She's also committed to science communication. She frequently interacts with the media to discuss urgent environmental issues and promote public understanding of science. Her efforts enhance the visibility of critical research findings and influence policy and public engagement on environmental conservation. Her career is driven by a commitment to integrate scientific research with actionable conservation policies, and she wants to ensure that biodiversity and ecosystems are maintained and restored. When she's not immersed in policy work or in research, she enjoys exploring the diverse landscapes of Colombia, where she has lived since 1998. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Armenteras. Dolores, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marta, for the introduction. Thank you, Raymond. And thank you all, for the organizers, for inviting me today. It is really a great pleasure to be being here. And I'm glad finally to be here with you today after having to reschedule because I lost my last month due to losing my voice. So I apologize for that. Yeah, after this very kind introduction, can you share, can you see my screen and can you hear me well so I can start?
Yes, we can
Okay.
see the slides and we can hear you.
Excellent. So this is thank you again for the introduction, Marta. And this is the title of my presentation today. I'm going to talk about a little bit a different perspective on Amazon forest degradation. And here's a little bit the roadmap for today's discussion. And we'll start by understanding a little bit the significance of the Amazon or revising or remembering why it's important for all. And defining some key terms, and also we'll delve a little bit into the drivers of deforestation and degradation, with a particular focus on the role of fires, which is something very important right now in the last years in this region. And we will explore some impacts of these fires, and I'll show you some of what I think are the gaps in our understanding, and discuss a little bit where we're heading in the area. And I cannot finish without talking about the essential science policy interface, and that I believe that we all scientists should be more involved, and with some takeaways home, or some points for discussion if you want to say it. But I need to start and step back a few years, because this is something very important. I talk a little bit in my work about healthy international collaborations and the reasons, and parachuting science. And the reason is because I kind of parachuted in Colombia in 1990 years. So I need to step a few backs in 1998 when I moved to Colombia. I remember the single of Cher, believe, was topping the UK. Because I'm originally from Barcelona and I lived in the UK, and I had part of my training in the UK, and I was there when from there I moved to Colombia, partly to collect some data for my PhD. And that's why I was not purely parachuting science. I was not going to only collect data and go back. That was 25 years ago, right? I also came to Colombia to do some capacity. I'm building capacity in one of the local institutions here. So I kind of feel obliged to explain this, because I think this is very important, and it's part of the reason why I bring some extra issues when I have opportunities like this one that you're giving me today. So I kind of, part of the reason why I moved was because of that, but part of the reason is it was because you see my slide on the maps, so the slide on, yeah, you're seeing the map slide, right? Part of the reason is because 50% of the tropical forests are in South America. And I like to remind myself of why I do and what I do and why I'm here where I am. So I initially came for 6 months, and it's 25 years after that, and I'm still here. And part of the reason is this, because so many of the tropical forests left are in South America. And of course, around 7.5 million, and it will depend which source you use, of the Amazon biome are in the continent where I'm living and where I'm working and where I've been, or I made my home. So the complex evolutionary story of the regions, which is not something that I'm going to talk about today, but that has created these heterogeneous landscapes and riverscapes at multiple scales in the region. And as a result, the Amazon basin, and you see part of the border, it's extremely rich. As a result, we see all these, the continent has all these biogeographical regions, and partly the Amazon River also, it has several bioregions that some are divided by the Andes, but some have created this amazing evolutionarily and organism diversity in the Amazon. So much that today we have more or less 10% of known plant species and animal. The 10% of the world's vertebrate and plant species are in the Amazon. And this is very important. One of my colleagues, this is a reference from one of my colleagues from the panel, scientific panel of the Amazon, that corresponds to approximately 0.5% of the Earth's total surface. So in 10% of the diversity in so little of the surface. And in less than an hectare, we have as much diversity as we have in Europe, in 1 hectare in Europe. So this is really an important region for all of us and why it matters for all. So this habitat heterogeneity created also reflects in a complex system of flooded and non-flooded environments. So water and land cannot be separated easily in this part of the world. So when we talk about the many aspects, blue-green nexus has to be always in mind in our research. And there are evidence of the presence of humans in the Amazon over even longer than this. This is a 12,000 before Christ picture of the Amazon in Colombia. Many of what I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk of Colombia since I'm based here. And we are talking about a basin with more than 35 million people inhabiting, a great percentage of them indigenous communities with a high diversity of indigenous languages today, more than 35 ethnic groups as well. And luckily, we still we've been able, or the region has been able to have a territorial protected through different figures, protected areas and indigenous territories. It's covering a lot of this very important area for the world in terms of biodiversity. However, and this is part of what I've been doing in the last years, the Amazon and the Amazon basin and the different countries are facing many threats. And one of the most well-known, for sure, it's the deforestation, right? So these are all maps from the science panel for the Amazon, the process that we involved them a few years ago. And you can see that deforestation is all over this region, the basin, all the yellow spots. On the right, however, you see other threats like I was saying. I mean, we're talking about flooded environments. We're talking about not only forests, but also this green-blue nexus everywhere. And we're seeing the dams, current dams and projected dams all over the basin. And this has many implications in terms of degradation of the ecosystems. Further, we have the areas under extraction of oil and gas listed in different regions of the Amazon plant and already undergoing this use of the resources that is threatening this biodiversity. Here as also the mining, the official mining and some of the illegal mining, I don't know if you see it, but many across the rivers, along the rivers, are threatening many of these areas. So that's part of the reason why I accept any opportunity to talk about the Amazon, and I'm very thankful to be here today. So as I was saying before, deforestation was one of my first background areas because I'm interested in landscapes, because I'm interested in forests, and because I came to a region where there were many things going on. So many of the research over the years has been related into understanding the rates, the patterns, and the drivers of deforestation. And this is one of the examples of that. Things are not so easily understood about the difference between similar countries that you would expect initially to have a higher deforestation in certain areas, and then you find out that perhaps what's going on it's not so evident for the whole continent. So we've been untangling deforestation rates, untangling what was happening, what were the drivers, what the difference between different forest types. If you look at Atlantic forests, which in the bioregional map that I showed you before, are separated from the Amazon with the Caatinga and the Chaco regions, for example. But in any case, trying to untangle what was going on and seeing the different tropical dry forests, tropical montane forests have different drivers, different rates of deforestation, etc., etc. One of the common things, though, all over the continent, the region, and the Amazon is the transformation of these ecosystems for agriculture and, cattle activities. So this is one of the things that has transformed over the last few decades, the current transformation that we're seeing in this region. And it has to do a lot with this productivity, but also has to do with some land grabbing happening in the region. So in some areas, there is cattle grazing, but it doesn't really couple with the meat demand or the market demand. And it has more to do with the speculation with the land and land grabbing. So the complexity of the region, it sort of drives you as a scientist to move into untangling more problems and trying to understand the mechanisms of what happens everywhere. So this is just some of the examples. And one of the other regions, one of the other reasons in this region that is causing deforestation has to do with coca cultivation, illicit crops cultivation. But when you start to untangle this business, some of the reason of some of the places where this deforestation it's happening has to do with those places where European and other international collaboration development projects were established in the 60s and in the 70s. So the complexity, it's much more deeper than looking into a single effect or a single cause of things happening. In any case, as I was saying, deforestation is one of the perhaps most known problems happening in the Amazon and threats for the extremely biodiverse ecosystems that we have here. And right now, we already have over 1 million of those 7.5 million square kilometers. We have over 1 million deforested, right? However, what I'm invited to talk about today is a little bit more subtle, is a more subtle process, which is forest degradation. And we will now focus a little bit on these forests that still have the conditions of forests, have the panorama of or the qualification of being a forest, but their conditions, it's quite different from what they were supposed to be or they were, or a baseline. So forest degradation is much more subtle in a way because forest still stands. So this is an example of the difference between deforestation and degradation. And deforestation is a binary system. It's much easy to say this is forest and this is not forest. But degradation is far from binary. And this is an example of a forest that has just been burned on the left. A colleague from the panel, scientific panel from the Amazon Borough, lent me these two pictures, but in any case, it's just to illustrate the difference. And perhaps it's much harder to see that on the right, this is a forest that actually had been subjected to logging in the past and was burned 7 years previous to this picture. And it's much greener, so you would call it probably, it's likely that you would call it a forest, but it's important that we define exactly what is a forest and what is degradation in that sense. So degradation refers to the decline of that health, of that vitality, of this capacity of productivity of the forest. And it's a process that it's more invisible, more hidden, and it involves the deterioration, things getting worse in terms of forest structure, in terms of forest composition, in terms of functioning. And this is an example of a process that I'm trying to illustrate here. You lose the height of the forest, you lose biomass, you lose species, and still you would call it a forest, but it's not what it was. So it affects the ability of the forest to provide ecosystem service, right? So we are seeing these changes in tree density, biomass, as I was saying, the loss of biodiversity, a change in a species composition, right? We are disappearing, and this is the most obvious of the or not so obvious process that are happening, but then you have an eventual change of ecological functions happening, disruption of ecosystem services, and still we might see it as a forest, and many people might see it as a forest. So what I'm trying to say here is, while we have a lot of knowledge on forest deforestation, we're starting to understand what's going on in terms of forest degradation, and at least another million, if not more, were defined as forest degraded in the Amazon when we did this revision in the scientific panel for the Amazon. So 70% more of those remaining forests are degraded. So we're having all these changes. Thanks to the work with a group of colleagues, we managed to do a revision of what was going on in terms of forest degradation and an overview of this degradation process in the Amazon. And this is just a summary, and I'm not going to talk about the whole process and the whole review, but here we identified four of the most important drivers of degradation in the Amazon, for the whole basin, including all 9 countries that are involved in, depending on which limits you use. So timber extraction, fire, edge effects, and extreme drought were quantified as the most important drivers of changes for the Amazon. Because I've done a lot of work in fire, this is what I'm going to focus today a little bit more. And this is something that is also more common than we think all over the world. So we're seeing high percentages of fire-related forest loss all over the world. And this is something that it's becoming more and more common. So this is, again, it's like going back home at the beginning of my career and trying to understand what was happening to the forest, particularly because traditional practices in the region have included the use of fire for subsistence activities for many years in the Amazon, everywhere in the world, in all other places. I'm back to the Amazon. And these types of use had low impact, and the culture of burning for thousands of years was quick and effective. It was a way to manage the land. It was, of course, it does create a reduction of biomass, but enriches the soils. It's in a long rotation. It's a sustainable enough practice, and that has been, like I said at the beginning, 12,000 years of presence, 20,000 years of presence of humans in the Amazon. And we didn't see the big fires that we're seeing today. The tropics are not a region where fire is a natural event. It was brought by humans. And yet the whole planet is on fire, and the Amazon is also having problems with extreme fires more and more still every year. And one of the things that when I started working with fire, I was trying to untangling is measuring and understanding the difference between deforestation fires. So when you cut the forest down and you burn it, right? That it's probably for those purposes that I was showing you in that picture, is for land conversion to pasture or other types of agriculture. But these are different from pasture management fires. So pastures are already in use for agriculture or cattle growing. And people use fire for managing because it's an easy and cheap way of enriching and managing those lands. However, we are seeing forest fires as well in the last few decades. And these are the fires that I'm talking about when I'm talking about the fire entering a standing forest and degrading the forest and causing that deterioration of processes that I was talking about when I show you the slide on forest degradation. So whether the fire comes from deforestation fires, which is bad enough, whether the fire escapes from land management practices, when it enters a standing forest, it causes a cascade of events that leads to degradation and changes on species composition and ecological process, as I said. And sometimes I joke about that. Actually, when I moved to Colombia, I wasn't even aware of the warming that was going on and how the critical situation has gone in terms of air temperature and the high temperature that we're seeing in the surface of the planet. And it basically mostly was around this when I moved to Colombia and things started to happen. So I didn't move in a sense looking for a research or trying to understand climate change effects. However, it's inevitable. So in the last 2 decades, we're seeing these increases in temperature and changes in precipitation, and this is causing more fires happening in the Amazon. And as we know, there are a lot of feedbacks between the climate, fire, and vegetation all over the world. All over the world, these relationships are happening. So, increase drought and increase precipitation, temperatures, longer dry season, stronger droughts, changes in precipitation patterns are causing an stress on vegetation and are making vegetation more susceptible to wildfires or to fires or to escaped fires in this case, because they're not natural fires. Again, 99% of the fires here are not caused by natural effects. So we're seeing new records of drought and warmth in the Amazon. So this is like a cocktail of conditions helping the occurrence of more and more fires, because there's still not control of what's happening with this deforestation and the illegal use of fire, illegal deforestation. And in the case of pasture management, some are even not intended, but the conditions are helping fires to spread into the forest. So part of what this has driven me is also to try to understand a little bit more how the ecosystems respond to fire in this part of the world, in this continent. And there's a lot of levels as well at which the species responds at the individual level, a population level, community level. But there's so much that we still don't understand about how the species will respond, or whether they have some strategies already, adaptive strategies to fire, for many reasons that we are sort of like trying to untangle this new knowledge on how biodiversity responds to fire in areas of South America. So the problem is that the effect of fires on forests and on species is mixed. So we are finding species that are sensitive, others that survive fires, and others that resist fires. But there's a lot of knowledge that we still don't have on what drives the response, and where, and on when, and what's going to happen with all these effects. So it has to do with the functional traits of the species, the adaptive strategies that some species have developed, whether for fire or for resisting other disturbances. But there's a lot that we're trying to contribute to so far, particularly in this part of the northern western part of the Amazon in this sense. And as much as for plant species, it's difficult, it's even more difficult for the fauna to understand how fire can drive changes in terms of obviously vegetation and habitat and resources, but also changes the shelter, the predation risk, the dynamics in terms of what's going on. And really, there's a lot of unknown relationships and responses in terms of fire in the Amazon. There's some very nice and interesting succession and on the long-term effects of mammal succession, for instance, in the Cerrado. And there's also some research that we're doing in this part of the world. And again, we're seeing mixed responses and the need for long-term research on biodiversity response to fire. And what has to do again with degradation? This has all to do a lot with degradation, because in terms of when fauna starts to disappear or composition changes in this forest, even if we are seeing a standing forest, we are seeing a different forest. So this is just an example of what happens when the faunation happens in a forest. But again, I'm trying to, from borrowing this very wonderful example of what happens when there's a defaunation and this long-term consequence that can have, and how the vertebrate community and all the regeneration and dispersal of species changes, and all the consequences that will have in even what it looks like a standing forest. So again, there's a lot that we still don't know in terms of that. And unfortunately, the fire that has arrived to the Amazon and these big fires are not yet going away and are present in the area. And basically, part of the problem that I also wanted to illustrate, and this is just for Brazil, it's not for the whole of the Amazon, but this is the gaps in research. Biodiversity is immensely and vastly underestimated, unknown, and the effects of a powerful driver of change like fire, it's even less known in this region. And the consequence, I don't think we are really globally estimating it well enough. And again, as much as we can do, it will be a hope for the future of the region. Not only that, there's the scenario, the perspective of what's going on in terms of degradation in the Amazon. And this is just on the right, the maps of the 4 different drivers: degradation due to drought that I didn't talk about today, fire, logging, and edge effects, which is something else we could talk another day. But there's a projection and estimation that another 2.5 million square kilometers might be degraded. So there's a lot of combination of effects that are causing these cascade effects happening, and that we still don't know. So basically, right now we are saying in some estimations that 38% of all remaining forests in the region might be degraded, and that's a lot, because again, we are in many counting models, agreements. We are still thinking that we have intact forests when it's not really, and human-induced degradation requires going beyond measuring and quantifying deforestation and quantifying degradation and identifying and quantifying these different types of disturbances, so that the actions in the ground can be tackled and the strategies can be pointing out to the right direction. So in this sense, I think it's very important to acknowledge that many of us work in places where perhaps it's not our home country, or I made my home country where I am now, but it is a privilege, and it's not a right to look and work in these countries. And in that sense, we have to look and share equally what the equipment, the research, the capacity we have, the voice, the opportunities to move more. And in that sense, that's what I wanted to bring about, is to talk about the science policy. I think that if we want to take actionable conservation and action and sustainable development in places so important for the whole planet, no matter where you are, you have to involve more in this kind of not measured typically like many of the scientists are. We are measured, right, with this production of science and impact factor, but with doing actionable activities. And this is why I've been working at several levels of policy, and not only doing capacity building, mentoring students, doing research, but also listening to people and addressing authorities, translating science, trying to be in those spaces that, again, you're not going to get knowledge, you're not going to get the research funding out of it, but perhaps you're going to make more impact trying to influence some of the decisions at different levels. And there are many examples. In Colombia, we managed to push a little bit the idea of integrating fire as a controllable management tool, because there's good fire and bad fire, and good fire could be used to avoid bad fire happening in some of the regions. So this is just an example, but there are many others that we could talk about. So again, publish or perish. Maybe I've been working too long, and this is something that I don't rely and try anymore. I think we have to do a much bigger impact. I'm very glad, or I was very glad when I saw this page where policy impact of your research, because it's really, this is the worked out how to measure the impact of your research. And it's not, again, the measurement is not about the number of papers or conference that you go. I think it has to go beyond that. So this is one page that I recommend. I mean, it's not ideal, but it's something that wasn't there before, to measure how your documents and your productivity is impacting. And just to, I don't know whether to share with you, but there are other activities that I think also help communicate the importance of these ecosystems. So I've been in the last few years collaborating with one of wonderful artist colleague of mine, and she's been leading some exhibition and transdisciplinary artistic work between her discipline and biology and gender researchers. And I think it's a way of changing the culture and the way we approach things. And one of the way of doing it, it's with art, and getting out of your comfort zone is really important. So we're talking about changing the landscape. We're talking about changing the way we do our work. And I think part of that is through culture and alternative ways like this one. Is something that I encourage you to explore and go beyond your scientific work every day at your research or academic or universities. And finally, like I was saying, I have to finish. I cannot miss an opportunity to talk about how to do healthy global scientific collaborations. This is very important. Many of us are privileged, and we have to think about our privileges wherever we act. And try to avoid certain attitudes. Really think about not going to take advantage of researchers in countries where there are less capacities or less infrastructure or less conditions, because in a way they have everything. They have we have the biodiversity in these places. So I encourage to build long-term collaborations. Try to push your institutions wherever you are to not do a punctual anecdote that I call it sometimes research, but to build and construct ways of doing long-term and promote a lot of research flow, but don't extract the resource of these middle and low-income countries where most of the biodiversity of the planet is. So, like I said, I don't miss an opportunity to talk about these things. That I encourage you, if you want to read about this a little bit more on this paper I wrote a few years ago. So with that, really, I want to wrap up and thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening. And I'm open to any questions you might have or you want to discuss about. Thanks.
Thank you very much. This was wonderful. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and I can read them off for others, for everyone to hear. I'm not seeing any questions yet, so I'm just gonna give everyone a couple of minutes to collect their thoughts and ask questions if they have any. So perhaps I will kick off the Q&A session as we're waiting for questions from others. First of all, an amazing talk, and it's just kind of mind-blowing how much you've been involved with in terms of both the research and policy and science communication. One can, only hope that we'll have similar impact down the road as you have had with your work, for sure. But I'm wondering, you haven't talked much about, you've talked about a lot forest degradation and different impacts of on forest degradation and forest deforestation in general. Are there any tangible restoration efforts going on in the Amazon, or are we still at the stage of learning about the threats to the Amazon and learning about the ecology of the Amazon?
Thanks, Martha. That's a very good question. I don't actually work on restoration, so I don't want to give the wrong answer. However, there are efforts, small successful efforts, a lot of investment, and I'm more worried personally. I'm more worried about understanding an investment of limited resources into restoration when we still haven't halted deforestation. And I'm not meaning that we're still understanding trends and happen. No, I think we know already a lot of that.
Mhm.
We really know. So that's why the science policy interface is so important. Perhaps we don't need anymore the reasons, the why, the where, the trends. And in terms of deforestation, like I said, in degradation, there's a lot of gaps in science that we still don't know. We still haven't found a way of quantifying degradation properly. So, which is different. It's a different stage of knowledge. However, it's the same. I mean, how are we going to do restoration if we still don't understand exactly what degradation implies and it's bringing? So unfortunately, I'm one of those that I always think is first we need to, actually I do have a slide, the last one that I remove it, but I think that there's a very important how you say this in English, a hierarchical approach. We first need to avoid this. See, we are not at the stage of having been successful to avoid deforestation in the first place. Is still happening, although some countries have reduced it. So every hectare that is lost of this mega diverse biome, it's really unrecoverable. So where do you want to put your investment? So I think it's really important to stop and avoid deforestation and degradation. But obviously, we have to go beyond quantifying and knowing the trends, but addressing the causes. So this is something that it's not easy. It's not an easy talk to say, and it's not an easy implementation and action measurement measures that can be in place so easily, but it's something that we need to push for. So we need to account for illegal activities, and science can help a lot, not only with all what we already know, but with anticipating, with the early warning systems, with the prediction of where is going to happen, and so there's no avoidance of action. But if you don't translate and bring this knowledge to the stakeholders and people that make decisions and that on the ground, it gets lost. And I think this is part of the message I wanted to give. And then once we avoid it, in places like, again, the Amazon is still undergoing many changes. Then we can sort of like, we have to aim to reduce it. And then we have to reverse, in some places, very critical, the degradation of degraded old growth forests. It's really important. And there are some things going on, but you will probably, actually, there's a chapter or two and a policy brief from the science panel for the Amazon where you'll see some examples. But you'll see that there are a few 100 hectares, 1,000 hectares maximum. So we're talking about millions of square kilometers of this biome. So yeah, the trade-off are something to discuss. And I know we are in the restoration of the decade, and I'm not saying no to restoration, not at all. I don't mean that, but I mean that we need to make an effort on other more pressing things happening.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you for this perspective. We have several questions now, so I'm just gonna read them off for you. I'll start with a question from Camille Gallard. Besides being ethical towards other researchers, how do you think we can have more fair global science support in terms of money flow?
This is a really, really important question because even when people in middle income and low income countries manage to establish a collaboration, a good collaboration, respectful collaboration, the money, the funding doesn't go to these places, and it's really a minimum amount, in the sense of. They'll invite you, no? They'll invite people, they'll invite students. You can go to these countries where they're more wealthy for exchange and capacity buildings. But then a lot of the work needs to be undertaken in the countries. And then maybe when the people from the institutions that have the funding or provide the funding go to these places, they bring some resources, but then they hire people only for the 2 weeks field work, 1 month field work, and that's not enough. People has to live. So when you build long-term relations and you find mechanisms to send some resources to those countries with all the safeguards that all the institutions need to do. There are many examples of successful programs, and I think there should be more successful programs. I was lucky enough to have a partnership for enhanced research funded by the USAID collaboration, and the funding came to my institution. So with little resources, I could collaborate with people in the States, but I could also fund and give grants and provide resources to do the research here. And this is really important. So I think you need to do an effort. And this is a discussion at your institutions or at your research funding body in your countries. And I also take any chance to discuss about this. I was in the Advancement American Association for the Advancement of Science, invited by the National Academy of Science of the US, talking about this program, precisely showing them the investment, the return, the impact you can have with that is much higher. So I'm not saying that all the funding will go to the places, but you can try to find a better balance, to find mechanisms to do it. And it's not to send, again, resources just for the field work or the time or the duration of that, because this is not the way you build capacity in the countries. And then there's a lot of other mechanisms that can be discussed. But the first thing is that when you submit a proposal, first, if you're going to go to one country that it's diverse, I hope that you'll involve local researchers and from the beginning, from the design, you co-design any project with them, try to do it, try to find them, and try to start building that collaboration. And then find the mechanism to support some of the local infrastructure. And then come and spend some time, some real time, not just a short time, and see where things are most needed, right? But mostly convince them always in the co-design of a project, convince you or try to, or make an effort, or try to make a better effort to increase the amount of money that you'll find a way to do it, to send it. There are many ways, institutional agreement, collaboration. There could be, it depends if you are with an NGO or an institution, some will take longer. You can have your, I've forgotten the English name for that, but you mechanism, financial mechanism to make sure that the institution reports the way the funding institution. So there are many ways of doing it, and it takes time and effort, and it's not easy in some cases. But you have to do it to have a bigger impact. This is the where you have to invest some of your time more than in other places. That's my opinion anyway.
Thank you. Another question is from Janet Franklin. Thank you for your talk. What are the main trends you have witnessed in the Amazon in the decades you personally have done this research? Is it the increase in fire, or is it something else?
No, there are many things, and increasing fire is one of the things. I mean, I could tell you, I always tell sometimes I tell the anecdote that 20 years ago, here in Colombia, institutions working in the Amazon, and people said that I was wasting my time researching on fires. And now we're seeing that, fire is one of the main disturbance of happening in the Amazon. In the northwestern part of the Amazon, which is the wettest part of the Amazon, where fire even should be less than in other parts of the Amazon, right? So that's one trend. Unfortunately, this is something that it's clearly happening on the one hand. Obviously, the climate change and the drought and the change in precipitation and temperature and patterns, which I don't really work on that, but this is something that we're seeing it. We had here in Colombia, for instance, we had 3 years in a row of not too strong Nina, but we had 3 years of Nina and floods and problems and lots of rain. So this is really obvious. And third, a very worrying one, and it has perhaps increased after the pandemic. It's a very difficult, again, one of them, this is not something that it's easy to discuss and try to understand and talk with people about. It's the criminality, the illegal activities in the Amazon, in the border between countries, in many of the regions have gone up. But up like, exponentially almost in some of the regions. So this is a really worrying trend. And the demand of many of the products that drive those illegal activities comes from international, overseas and other countries. So this is something that is really worrying. So the many things we could discuss, but gold mining and illicit crops are really something very serious in right now in the last 5 years. And it was already serious before. I'm not saying not, but now it has increased a lot. So yeah. So it depends of where you are as well and which part of the Amazon, one thing or the other is happening. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I can imagine that these are very difficult to address. So yeah. The next question is from Hazel Gordon. I haven't heard much about explosions of pathogens, insects, fungi, etc. on forest edge or degraded forest conditions. Is this ever a problem in these biodiverse environments?
Yeah, that's a very good question as well. And actually, there are some studies of deforestation and some viruses and malaria as well with some host, how you say it, host interaction. And there's a correlation of higher malaria and other diseases in areas undergoing transformation, specifically with edge, how far the edge effect, because when edge created, when an edge created, right? An edge is a limit between two different things, right? There's some natural edges and then some longer term and newly created edges. When there's a deforestation, you create an edge immediately. And how far that, I don't think I've ever seen a research on edge effects, particularly on the edge effect, how far the effect would go and the dimension of the effect. But there might be something out there and it's something worthwhile exploring. However, this is potentially the Amazon. It's a biodiverse place for pathogens and virus, and potentially there's some models of expansion or risk of diseases coming from the natural world and jumping to the humans in those areas that are undergoing this transformation. So that's something that has been studied a little bit, and there's some warnings about it. But again, specifically about the edge effects, I'm not sure. But I'm sure there must be some effects and interactions, as well as any interspecific interactions between prey and predators get affected when there are edges. So there might be in a way. So it's something very interesting to explore more. But again, I don't work on those things.
Thank you. Blair Hedges asks, what is the main reason for the forest fires? Is it slash and burn agriculture?
Yeah, well, we didn't go into that because I was already talking about the impacts when fires enters some of the forest, but it depends again. It depends, and on some places, like I said, when there is illicit activities, you already have a problem, and fire is used for deforestation, and deforestation is not legal. Whenever, and it's very little legal deforestation. There is some legal deforestation with permissions when you build a dam or when you build an official road or whatever. So, but usually the most part of deforestation is illicit, illegal, and in many places they use fire for cleaning. So it's not a slash and burn agriculture. It's for deforestation, and that deforestation has many purposes. Some of them are for agriculture, but most of them is for either cattle growing, soya, and soya it's an agricultural crop, right? But I mean, yeah, for those transformation of the land and managing. So it has to do a lot with that. And again, even when the fire for deforestation or the area that has been deforested, it's burned, there's a higher risk of entering the standing forest because of the conditions. The edge creates desiccation in the edges, and the microclimate, the more severe droughts and all the conditions, so it enters that forest. So it's a lot of that. A very dry year, or El Nino year that causes drought in the Amazon, it's again a cocktail where it's more likely that those fires will expand. So the ignition, who puts the ignition, it will depend on some of the area. There's some studies where in protected areas and indigenous reserves where there's some presence of local communities, the fires are very small and they don't cause big problems. So it's not that slash on agriculture, the traditional use of fire that is causing these fires. So it has to do a lot with conditions, climate change, severity, and bad use of tools, and not having transition to other way of cleaning the land, or not being able to stop those stakeholders that conduct these illicit activities of deforestation. It has to do with that. There's very little. There's some evidence of some lightning causing fires, but that doesn't really happen much. So because of the climate change, the conditions have become drier, and the exposition to those risks are higher. So I think it's a bit of a combination, and it will depend again on the country. Across the borders, you go to between Colombia and Ecuador. In Ecuador, fires are more associated to roads and some oil and infrastructure development and deforestation. So it really depends. So yeah, and land grabbing. For whatever reason, land grabbing is a speculation, right? Some will go into other crops, and some are thinking ahead in what they're going to do with that land in the future, and it has to do a lot with that. So it's human ignition costs, really,
Well, thank you very much. We still have a couple of questions in there, but we're unfortunately out of time, and I know Dolores needs to run teach a class, so we're not gonna keep you post time. Thank you very much again. It was an amazing talk, and I think everyone really enjoyed it, especially given how many questions we hear. So
Thank you very much.
if your question wasn't answered, I would suspect that Dolores might be able to answer it via email if you email her with any specific questions. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I encourage you to follow up if you have any specific and important questions. And the talk will be posted on our YouTube channel should you want to revisit it at some point in the future. So thank you again, and to everyone, please come to our next funk lecture, which will be in September. We're taking a break in August. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.